Hi, my name is Craig Richardson, and welcome to Mind to Heart. In this show, we take a journey from our logical, critical mind to the powerful heart center where real transformation occurs. My guests help us understand our journeys by telling us about their paths and lessons they learned along the way. In September 2019, I traveled to the UK to participate in a week-long psychic development program at a school called Arthur Findlay College. In the US, we'd like to say that Arthur Findlay College is the Harvard of mediumship programs, although I'm sure my guests would probably say it's more like the Oxford or Cambridge of mediumship development programs. For those who don't know, spiritualism developed in the 1800s in the UK and the USA nearly simultaneously, which is not surprising because, as they say, we are two countries separated by a common language. Arthur Findlay was a well-known English spiritualist and president of the Spiritualist National Union. He donated a beautiful manor home in the mid 20th century for the purposes of advancing psychic science. Like everything else in England, not only were the surroundings beautiful, but the Arthur Findlay program was also top notch with extremely well trained and dedicated mentors. In retrospect, the trip was incredibly important for me at that time in my life. My mother had passed away the month before, leaving me an orphan, and I had not fully grasped or grieved the situation. The program was educational from a psychic development point of view, but for me and others in the program, it was transformational from a personal and spiritual perspective. One of our two mentors that week was Sally Barnes, my guest today. The other was another wonderful teacher and medium, Irene McGilvery from Scotland. Sally's grace and poise were evident from the first time I met her. Her quiet confidence, grasp of the material, and most of all, her healing touch were just what I needed at the time. She experienced psychic phenomena from the time she was a child and ultimately dedicated her life to mediumship and healing, as we'll hear more of. I also had the pleasure of doing a private reading with Sally during that week. She zeroed in on my issues immediately, and her loving healing power really helped me make strides in overcoming both my parents' departures. As we'll hear from Sally, healing goes hand in hand with psychic and mediumship gifts. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in live from the UK, my friend and guest, Sally Barnes. Sally, welcome to Mind to Heart. It's great to see you again.
Hello, it's lovely to see you again.
Well, I'd like to start, maybe not fully at the beginning, because we'll get more into your childhood, but can you just start off by giving us a sense of when you were a child and some of the experiences? I know that in your bio it talks about you heard whispering and other, but can you just kind of walk us through how that all unfolded for you, how old you are, and what it was you experienced?
Yes, certainly. I was really quite young. I would say 8 or 9 years old when I first became aware that I was hearing voices. I would hear my name being called. I would hear like whispered conversations in the corner of a room. Very often at night, I would see forms, hazy forms, walk across the room, and just always was very often had a sense that someone was there, someone was standing beside me watching me. And it used to frighten me. Obviously, I think most people at that age it would, but it became so often that I started to lose the fear. I started to lose it. And then I would talk to people about it, and obviously gets looked at very strangely, and would try to talk to my colleagues or my friends at school. And I know that there were more than one or two that thought I was a bit strange because I tried to talk to them about these things. And I always recall I was 8 years old at primary school, and we were laying on the grass and playing, making pictures and faces in the clouds. And I remember turning to them and saying, "You do know that there's more to life than what we can see, what we can touch, etc." And they didn't know what I meant, which was kind of understandable because I didn't know what I meant at that time. They were.
Yeah, I was
It
gonna
was
say that's pretty philosophical for an 8 or 9 year old, right?
yes. I didn't know what I meant, and I can remember afterwards thinking, "What was I saying?" But nobody walked away from me at that time. But I do know I was thought as strange.
Now, when you were around, did you find any of your friends or anybody in the neighborhood that was anybody else kind of like that? Did you ever kind of get into playing into seances or anything?
No, not until I was 15, 16. And what instigated that is I was laying in bed one night and I heard my name being called really loudly, really clearly. And I went downstairs. There was no one there, but I went downstairs to get a glass of water, heard my name being called again, and thought perhaps it was my mum calling me from upstairs. So I went up to the bedroom and she was sound asleep, because which didn't surprise me because the voice I was hearing was a male voice. So I went back down a little bit, sort of looking into the corners, etc. And getting the glass of water, and clearly behind me I heard a male say my name. And I turned round and it was my father standing there. And I always remember, because at first I went, Dad. It was a lovely surprise. And then I remembered he had died. So then it was like, oh no, Dad. And then after that, we had a babysitter who was interested in such things. And I remember them talking to us about it. But that instigated the idea of having a seance. And I can remember asking him what to do. And he didn't really know, but that's what I did. I would then hold seances. And
Did he had he passed? How long prior to when you were 15 did he pass?
My father passed when I was 3 days before my 9th birthday.
So it had been a while.
It'd been quite a while, yes. But we had some interesting seances, and we did have communications, and we had communications that made sense. And once or twice there were messages, if you like, for people that sat with me that made sense to them, but it was information I didn't know. So that was quite interesting. It scared one or two who decided not to join in ever again, because the information was accurate.
Separates the wheat from the chaff, as they say, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Were these classmates of yours or friends or?
School friends. Yes.
Yeah.
School friends.
Now, what about, because I know the English schools can be kind of tough. Did you ever run into any trouble with teachers or instructors that?
No, because it wasn't something that I would speak about openly to just anybody, because I had learned early on that to talk about such things got people thinking that you perhaps weren't quite right in the mind. And also, there was some part of me that knew, even at that time, that there would be those that didn't understand. And the friends that I did coerce, shall we say, into joining me in seances, they were sort of mildly interested, and so were up for, I think they saw it as having a game.
Yeah.
But of course they quickly realized it wasn't.
Yeah, and I was going to say, we sort of like telling ghost stories, and you're sort of getting along with it, whether it's a sleepover, and then all of a sudden you realize, as we'd say in the U.S., you're not in Kansas anymore. It's like a whole nother ball game. Wait a minute, there's a little too much reality to this.
Exactly. Yes.
So I can see that, and also things it struck me too when just your comment too about what you said to your schoolmates at 8 or 9. I mean, I just think that you're an old soul who you just had that wisdom, or you've always been able to channel guides, because I had a few of those. I wasn't quite as in tune as you were, but there was a few things I had to remember looking back saying, and I was like, where did that come from?
Yes.
So I imagine that starting even with 15, when your dad showed up, that you learned to rely on these guides, right?
Yeah. The reason that incident in the school playing field sticks in my mind, I think, is because I didn't understand what I was saying. But yes, after my dad, and it instigated that idea of having seances, it kind of, in one way, confirmed what I believed, or what I always hoped was a reality. I did believe that we couldn't die, but at that time I didn't know it. And certainly at that time I had no idea of what a medium was. I didn't know that I had mediumistic abilities. So even though I was having seances and we were having successful communication, the word medium had never come into my awareness at all. Didn't know. And it wasn't until I watched a film, I maybe was a few years older than that. I watched the film Blythe Spirit with
Oh, sorry,
David
what was it?
Niven. Blythe Spirit with David
Blind
Niven.
Spirits. I'm not familiar with that.
Blythe Spirit with David Niven. Oh, you have to watch
Oh,
this
blind.
film. And there's this medium in that called Madame Arcati. And that's when I realised what a medium was. So, but I still,
It is amazing how. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, even though I realised then that that's what a medium was, I still never thought of myself as a medium. It just didn't occur to me.
Well, it is funny too. I had a friend of mine, Lloyd Auerbach, on a few weeks ago, and he's in Hollywood or does around there, and we were chuckling because it is funny the way the films handled that, and I think they're getting better. They're getting more realistic when you got some documentaries and Netflix ability. But we grew up with Dark Shadows and all of these sort of
Yes.
werewolf movies, and I do think that as our understanding of mediumship has evolved, so has the arts. But it is sort of amusing that they do all of that. Now, let me ask you, and we're going to take a break here shortly. So did you look back, was there anybody in your family, grandmother or somebody who might have had these kind of gifts?
Not that I'm greatly aware of. I used to think my grandmother had eyes in the back of her head. So maybe there was an intuition there. But, and I know when I began my journey and I started with healing, and she used to like it if I said to her, as I used to do her feet for her, and I say, "Do you want me to do some healing while I do your feet?" And she used to go, "Yeah, right." But I think she was a little nervous of it. But she's the one that I think, if there was somebody, would have had an ability. Yeah.
Well, and again, a different generation, and they had even more reason not to say anything. You had to be sort of
Exactly.
conformist.
The stigma was
Well, we're going
great.
to take our first break, Sally, and when we get back, I want to get a little bit, stay kind of in this time period, but talk more about, your upbringing and maybe some of the influences that you had, and then sort of how that you were able to marry the two and then emerge it as in your later career. So we'll be back
Okay.
shortly on the other side of the break. Hi, welcome back to Mind to Heart with your host, Craig Richardson. I'm delighted to have my guest, Sally Barnes from the UK, and she's a medium and healer. Sally, before the break, we had gotten into sort of how your childhood experiences had helped shape this interest in mediumship, and we'll get more into later on where that came into your life fully. But
Mhm.
what can you just give us a little background on where you grew up and the kind of home that you grew up in, and
Okay.
that kind of stuff?
Yep. I grew up in the area in England called Suffolk, mostly.
Suffolk. Hmm.
So I was in a place called Ipswich, which lots of people know because of Ipswich football team. Um, and then again into Woodbridge. But the bigger part of my childhood was spent in a seaside town called Felixstowe. And I had, at that time, I had three sisters. Oh, but remember back now. I now have four sisters and three brothers.
Wow, big
And at
family.
that time, we were one sister down, and she came later. And life was tough, actually. Life was very tough because of my father passing. And I always remember we lived in a flat, but it was in a way quite nice because we were just a little short walk from the beach and a short walk from a playground that had a paddling pool, etc. So there were good times, but it was very tough financially. And um, and so in childhood, there wasn't a lot of time for cuddles, for hugs, for individual attention. I always laugh and say we were herded um,
Mm.
through life at that point. And but then much later on, again, interestingly, when I was about 14 going on 15, my mum met this gentleman who became our stepfather. Amazing man, changed our lives, brought sanity into it. And even though at that point she had 7 children, um, he fed us, homed us, clothed us. And what's interesting, I think he's the first person that came into life, apart from my grandmother, that showed what unconditional love is, because
Mm.
he gave without wanting anything back. He fed us, he homed us, he clothed us, and they weren't his children. But he was an amazing man, never raised his voice or his hand. And then he and my mom had a daughter between them, my youngest sister. And so life after that was much, much better, and felt freer. And there was lots of laughter and what have you. Um, I don't know what else to talk about. I loved school. I really loved school. And but my mum, she kind of, yeah, I'm going to have to use the words because it's how it was. She made myself, because I have a twin sister, and she made us leave school and get work so we could start contributing to the household. Although my stepfather, I felt, provided more than adequately. Um, and then life just moved on. Slowly but surely, each of us left home, got married. I had a previous marriage to the husband that I had my children with. My children are adopted, and that was another life lesson. Nothing to do with coming into the work of spirit, but in a way it's involved, because I learned that it doesn't matter where our children come from, they're God given. Doesn't matter how they reach us, and that is love playing a role in this life, which is all involved with everything. It's very difficult sometimes to separate what happens in life with the spiritual path. You can't really, because it's intertwined.
Yeah, they're definitely trying. And as you're talking, it really struck me both, with your own children, but then your stepdad. So
Mm,
both of those, were not within the family. In other words, they weren't biological, if you will.
exactly.
And it sometimes it doesn't it take people from outside the family to show it? Because I think unfortunately sometimes families can get too comfortable with each other and there's too many other expectations. But and your stepdad sounds wonderful. I mean, that's a tough situation to walk into with 7 children,
Yes. Yeah.
and I can imagine that was also very tough on you when in those are very formative years. And whatnot, would you were like 9 and when your dad died, and then 15 when so I
Mm,
can imagine that, with that many people, and at that age you don't get it, but now you do. You look back and see the situation your mom was in. I mean, that must have been very tough on her.
absolutely. It was tough. And she was a tough, tough mum. Very, very Victorian, very tough. And she had to be, when you've got 7 children, that you are responsible for shaping their lives. And I can't say she always used the best methods, but we're here. If nothing else, she gave us the ability to stand on our own 2 feet. And my mum's in spirit now. Another lesson that came very quickly is my stepfather passed to the spirit world in 1987, and that was as a result of somebody breaking the law. And there was no, what's the word, no retribution, no punishment for this person. And that was a hard one to come to terms with, that this amazing man should die because of this, and nothing, no punishment. That's a part of my spiritual journey, which probably comes a bit later. Um,
Yeah, I can imagine that'd be hard. And I do think sometimes it really is. There is, I remember in my years in the Catholic Church, they would always say, it's a mystery or something. I mean, when they didn't have the
yes,
answer, but sometimes you just can't put human words around something
exactly.
I mean,
It's
I
a
know there's
mystery. It
efforts,
wasn't how I
right?
felt.
Yeah, and it's hard because, as much as particularly early on when we're dealing with spirituality, and yours started a lot earlier than mine did, you think that it's all sort of rainbows and unicorns, right? And
Mm,
everything goes well, and then all of a sudden and I think that's what spirit does, doesn't it? It challenges us with the real life
exactly,
situation.
exactly. And it's amazing, when you meet so many people on this journey. And I was the same actually. I used to think that somebody who worked for spirit had to have had a blessed life, and not so. Well, it is blessed, but not in the way they think, because each of our experiences is a blessing. But we've had just the same hardships, traumas, sadness, and grief as anybody. And that's one thing that always makes me smile, because I used to think that, you
Yeah, and I
know.
do think that's a lesson. And then, even in my years in the Christian life, and I still read the Bible and all. I mean, we worship somebody who's nailed to a cross. So I mean,
Yeah.
there's a daily reminder that, Jesus, who was an ascended master, whatever you want to call him, he had to show unconditional love by dying.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so I think that is a much more mature but difficult role, I think, or difficult understanding to get to eventually. And
Mm.
speaking of religion, I just wanted to touch a little bit about, what did you have religious upbringings? Was there things around you that, I mean, Christian probably if you're in England, but
I was christened into the Christian church, into the Church of England, but my family was very non-religious. And I can remember not begging quite, but almost begging to be allowed to go to Sunday school.
really?
And I was very surprised when I was allowed to go. And but my family, my mom poo-pooed religion. It was a load of rubbish as far as she was concerned. My grandparents attended church. They never appeared to be over religious people, but they did attend church in their local village. And my grandmother especially, she did a lot of good work in the village, and so she had a very Christian way. Well, so did my grandfather. They had very Christian ways about them. They would help anybody, and but there isn't a background of religion that I was forced into or made to believe that that's how it should be. But I wanted it. I was very happy that I was allowed to go to Sunday school.
Yeah, because it does bring a sense of grounding, and I think even and I love those small villages in England, and it was more than just a religion, wasn't it? It was really it was kind of the social center for the town, and they had
Exactly.
the Lenten Friday fish dinners. I mean, there was just part of
Exactly. Yes,
and so I
it was
think
the
people got a
community.
lot of fellowship out of it.
Exactly. But other than that, no religious aspect. But I do remember, even when I was young, I don't know if you have it where you are, but on the end of chapel walls or church walls, they used to say, and Jesus said, and then there'd be a quote. And I can remember reading them, and very often they'd make me feel quite tearful. So there was some kind of connection there that nobody taught me, nobody told me I should have, but I would feel it. And so that's always been there.
Well, one of the things that I love in my church experience were the saints, and as somebody with an English heritage, Irish as well, it's not surprising. So my patron saint is Saint Thomas More,
Oh, right.
who was a great English. If you ever watched the movie A Man for All Seasons, so it really helped. And I know a lot of priests too, in particular, have very strong devotions to our Blessed Virgin Mary. So there is
Mm,
something very spiritual about that, isn't there? The saints. I mean,
I think so.
they can come
Yeah,
alive, and I think that might be what you picked up on.
absolutely. It could be. Um, and I think it's more interesting to me as an adult thinking back because I didn't know why or understand at that time why I would feel emotional, why I would feel that I wanted to go and learn more at Sunday school, etc. But having said that, as I grew up, I was never, apart from christenings and weddings, I didn't become a church goer. And I always had this feeling that my church was the garden. My church
Hmm.
was on the beach. I never felt the need to go and be in a brick building, even if it was dedicated to that religion. I
Well, I
would
actually think that's a
rather,
very mature view of religion, actually, because I do think it's when, and I've actually had priests who said this, from the pulpit. Look, this hour a week isn't just this. You need to live and breathe and be party. But I think a
exactly.
lot of people do think they kind of punch the clock on that Sunday morning and all.
Yeah,
And it's also, I have a friend too whose parents, her mom was kind of new age hippie type, and she did the same thing because she was sort of dragged around the back of a VW van and stuff. And she actually
yeah.
found formal religion very comforting to her. She kind of went through, maybe part of it was rebelling against her mother, but um, I've actually seen it both ways. I've also seen where the church is so restrictive and people rebel against the fact that they don't allow anything, psychics or anything. So I
Mm,
just think, the way I look at it is you sort of take it for what it was. And then
mm.
hopefully, you took what you needed and moved on.
The first time I really enjoyed a church was actually one in Felixstowe at a wedding, and the priest there was fabulous, and he believed in healing and hands-on healing. And then when my mother passed to the spirit world, a sister organised the funeral, and I don't know where he came from, but they had a priest that did the service, and I became quite upset and angry in the service because he was all about hell and her sins, and
Yeah, that's just
uh, and oh my goodness, I was so upset. But I gave the eulogy on that day, and I spoke about my mum as my mum. I didn't nice it up. I didn't big it up. I spoke about her as my mum. And I always remember this priest coming up to me afterwards, and this isn't to show off, but he said to me, I've been doing this job for 60 years. And I thought, I'm not surprised when after I've listened to you speak. And he said, that's the best eulogy I've had.
Oh, neat.
Because I put the spiritual twist into it as well, because that's what I felt.
Well, no, that's
And
beautiful. People are ready to hear it too, I think.
yeah, yeah. And
Well,
I think you're right. There's some churches that will be very too old school, and there are some that are now very much coming in to meet
yeah,
with who it is today.
well, that's the time. Well, when we get back, we're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to get into more of how your gifts emerge really into a life's purpose. So we'll hear more about that when we get back after the break. Hi, welcome back to Mind to Heart with your host, Craig Richardson. I'm delighted to have my guest and good friend, Sally Barnes from the UK, on with me this show. Sally, so I'd like to get into now, as I said before the break. So, we've got great background on your upbringing. Sort of take us from the time that, you left the home, and then what happened along the way, and then ultimately where you found your mediumship gifts really became blossomed and then sort of directed your life's path.
Okay. So yes, I left home when I got married at 21, and at that point, um, mediumship and wasn't really in my awareness at that time. I still enjoyed reading about, listening about the paranormal, and I still enjoyed if I was with a group of friends, if I could get them moving to a conversation about what do you think happens when we die, I would just love it. And again, it was a mixed reaction. But I got married. Sadly, that didn't work out. And then 4 years later, we parted and we got divorced. And then I met my second husband, and we got married, wanted a family. I couldn't have children. And so we adopted two gorgeous children. And I have this last year become a grandmother for the first time, which is just amazing. And I'm thoroughly enjoying that.
Well, excuse me, I have to say this. I've been delighted because your daughter, I guess it is, does these cartoon types of things that, and you post them on Facebook, where
that's
wonderful creative messages about,
Yeah, no, that's me that does that.
It's wonderful. So that is a great thing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's you that does that? I thought she was doing it for you. Oh, well, you're the creative one then.
She sends the photos and I choose them and make little captions for them. Oh yeah, and that was
well, you have. I mean, you're in my business now, communications. I mean,
and that sort of kept the sunshine going throughout all the lockdown periods. But it was we'd adopted our son, and then the daughter came along. And interestingly, this is quick. I have to include this. We had decided that the one son was enough, that we wouldn't worry about adopting a second child. And we had this discussion one night. We were quite happy. We knew how difficult it was for other people. So we said, look, we're blessed. Let's let this go now. And we decided one night that the next morning I would phone social service and say, remove us from the list. But before I could phone them, they phoned us and said, we have a daughter for you. And I didn't realize how much I would love a daughter until the phone call. And both children have changed our lives. I mean, I can't even say how it does, because it's just pure joy. But it was shortly after my daughter became, she was about 8 or 9 months old, and I suddenly became quite ill, and nothing definitive, but I couldn't move much. I hurt, my body hurt, and I found myself not able to do very much. So I had to go and see a medical specialist who pushed and pulled and twisted and what have you. And he really, in a way, was the one that got me thinking more, because he attributed my condition to the need to release trauma from the past.
Oh, wow.
And I remember coming out of that first session. It's a long story, so I won't go right into it. Thinking, oh my gosh, this man's a healer. And I thought, because he put his hand, I remember he put his hands on my back, and then it was just a few words he whispered, and I know he did it intentionally, but not for me to know that he did it on purpose, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of got a ball rolling inside me emotionally. But anyway, I moved through that, and then it was a little bit later on, I met somebody, and he started telling me things about myself, and I thought, how do you know this? And cutting a long story again short, this encounter, at the end of this conversation, he revealed that he was a medium.
Oh, wow.
And then he said to me, you do know you're a medium?
Oh.
And I said, yes. And I knew it. I knew it as clearly as I've ever known anything in my life, without doubt, totally convicted. And I was 36 at the time.
36. Okay.
36 years old at the time. And I can remember asking him, I was hooked. I just said, oh, how do I go and learn more about this? And talked about the churches, mentioned the Arthur Findlay College, etc. But healing really was my instigator that convinced me I should follow this path. Because my son, we'd adopted him at 5 weeks old, and he was coming up for 5 and starting school. And he used to suffer every 3, 4, sometimes 5 weeks with this really, really bad colic type of condition. And he would be in excruciating pain. And I used to sit and look at my hands and think, I wish I was one of those people that could put my hands on you and take the pain away. And please don't ask me why, because I can't tell you, but I never thought to try it. And but after this person that I met said, you do realize you're a medium, and I knew it, and suddenly everything made sense. The next time my son had one of these attacks, which lasted never less than 2 to 3 hours,
Oof.
I laid him out on the bed, and I said to him, and he was screaming in pain, and I just said, look, Mummy's going to try some magic. And I put my hands on his stomach, and I just said out loud, God, I have no idea what I'm doing here, but please use me to take this pain from this child. And within 5 minutes, he was asleep.
Oh, wow.
And he never had another attack.
So that's the real hands-on healing that you learn. That's what Jesus did, right? It's the same stuff.
Absolutely. And that convinced me, yes, I should find out more. And so that led me to going around to local churches, listening to mediums, watching mediums, joining in classes, circles, as we call them. And then a year later, I had my first trip to the Arthur Findlay College.
That's a magical trip. The first one.
Absolutely, yes. Which you probably would gather is like mind blowing.
Yeah.
But for me, the biggest thing was I wanted to learn. I was thirsty. I was your typical green, eager student. And I remember at the end of the first week that we had a memorial service for a couple whose son had passed a year earlier. And I hadn't cried all week. And as you remember, we have what they call Weepy Wednesday, where by that time everyone's so emotional, they're in tears at the drop of a hat. And I was walking around thinking, what are these people crying for? We're in this beautiful place with spirit and learning. And then at this service, they played Elvis Presley, who I'm a huge fan of, singing You'll Never Walk Alone. And that was it.
Wow.
I was a goner. That was it for me. It broke her down. And I think it was the words, You'll Never Walk Alone, that did it for me.
Well, I think as you remember, and I said in the intro, so my mom had just passed away, and I didn't make it until Monday. I mean, I made it as far as Monday. I guess we call that Moody Monday. But and we had that experience on Monday where we went out and you sent us out and said go see what talks to you, and it was the trees, and I heard a
Oh,
song too. It
right.
was a Simon and Garfunkel, "You Are a Rock, You Are an Island," which,
Oh, right.
if you know the song, it's
Yeah.
all about somebody trying to be strong and never break, similar to that song. And it's like, oh my, that was it. I lost it at that point. But there is something magical, and I kept getting, for some reason, all week I kept getting drawn to that garden. I had to spend as much time out there, and I don't
I
know what it
know.
was,
It's beautiful. I
but
think it's peace out there. And also I know the people that do the garden. Will, I don't know if you met Will, I never spoke with him. There's love in the garden. They love it and they put love into it as well. So I think that makes a difference.
yeah, it was an energy like I've never felt before, and it was very healing, and it's just something that you were sort of attracted to, and that you had to keep going. And yeah, it is a transfer. You don't, I went there because I had an interest, but like you said, you really don't understand the emotional opening up that happens until
Absolutely.
you go through that. And as you remember, we had a group of us too, and we were all sort of coming in, nomads, sort of holing up there in the respite for a week, because we had all had a lot of
Mhm.
issues that had gone on. And I
Absolutely.
guess spirit draws people to them at any given time. So I'm hoping to get back there.
Yeah, good. Oh, it'd be nice to see you there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that opens up an important part. When people come to the college, and you probably remember, one of the things I like to talk about is, and because it's from my own experience too, is when you come into this pathway and you come in to learn about the spirit world and to open up your own abilities, it does open the doors to what you need to heal within yourself. And this is why people often will experience um, an emotional roller coaster at the beginning of development and the beginning of learning and understanding. Because one of my favorite sayings to a new group of students or a group of new students is, so you think you came here to learn to be a medium? And of course, they're all going to say, well, yes. And I
Right.
go, no, that's not so. You've come here to learn to be a medium, but that's almost like the byproduct. The real reason is that this opens the door for you to begin to know you, begin to heal yourself. And so it's a journey back to the nature of your own soul, true nature. So it's a kind of alchemy that starts taking place. And it can be like an emotional bombshell for some people. And that's why I like to make students aware of it. And, I learned that firsthand. And that's why that subject is so important to me as well.
Well, it certainly was, and it was for me. Like I said, it was a healing experience for me, and I want to pick up kind of on this. We're going to take our last break here, but really kind of get into that. The healing work that you've done and how this has kind of impacted the world, and some of the things that you're doing now, day to day, with it. Now that
Mhm.
you're, you know, been at this for a while. So we'll take a short break, and we'll see you on the other side. Hi, welcome back to Mind to Heart with your host Craig Richardson and my guest Sally Barnes, who's a medium and a healer. Sally, we've got our last segment here, and I think what I really like to do is to get into where we left off. And we discussed our experiences at Arthur Finley, and that was your first trip there. So obviously, that trip and that first time you there, sort of, it may not have sent you on that path. You were already on that path, but clearly that became your calling. So maybe kind of pick up there and tell us how that ultimately became what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. Um, I went there the very first time with a friend, and I can remember standing in the foyer and saying to her, and again, it was one of those things that just came out of my mouth. And I just said to her, I'm going to teach here one day.
Uh,
And I looked at her and said, I'm nuts, aren't I? Why did I say that? Um, but what I think was important is I suddenly realized that I was going to go on and teach, whether it was there or anywhere else. Um, so I knew I needed to learn as much as I could, and I needed to develop as best as I could, to develop the potential to the full ability that it was possible. Um, and I went the first 2 years. I went to the same course, and it was with an amazing tutor called Mavis Patilla, and And I went on the same beginner's course 2 years running because I could only do 1 week a year at the time. And I because I wanted to be sure I'd laid the foundation correctly. So I did that, and then I went on once a year for many years. A whole host of fabulous tutors, each one offering something different. I'm a great believer that, to hear different people and to
Sure.
put it this way, read different books helps you to find what you need. And and then yes, I loved it, but I also did courses outside, and within the first 5 years I was already teaching and running groups outside, in the outside world as we call it, as opposed to the college. And then it was actually Mavis Patilla who 2 or 3 years running said to me, have you thought about becoming a tutor here? And said some very nice complimentary things, but I wasn't ready. I didn't feel ready inwardly, because one of the things this taught me was that I always felt I was a confident person and had good self-esteem. And moving into this and that healing effect that we were talking about previously made me realize I wasn't. I was so lacking in confidence and self-esteem. I was actually quite shocked to realize it. So I knew that the knowledge, the practice, the experience was what I needed to get in order to work on building that. And then eventually there was one year I walked in. I remember walking through the bar, and Mavis called me over and said, "Have you done it yet?" And I said, "I've just done it this year," where I had applied. But what I did first is I took a degree level teaching adult course in the outside world first to boost my confidence. And this is another thing I'll always recommend to students. If you find there's an area that you need to boost, do it in the outside world. It doesn't have to be connected to spirit and spiritualism. Build your confidence somewhere else and then apply it. So that's what I did. And I used to go to courses, local courses. I still attended churches. I ran groups at different churches.
Is the spiritualist church over there, the spiritualist church?
Spiritualist churches. And also for, 27 odd years, I would do what we call services. So you saw the Sunday service at the college.
Yeah, right.
And it's a bit different here, because where you have 3 or 4 mediums on the platform at the college, one does the prayers, the address, then you have maybe a couple that will do communication. In our churches, you do the whole lot. So at least twice a month for all of those years, I would do 1, usually 2 a month of those. So it all contributed to experience and to building it and to building the abilities, because as you've probably heard many times at the college, you never stop learning. You can never stop progressing. You can never stop improving. I did a dem online last week, and even surprised myself with 1 or 2 different things that were coming through, because it was so different. And so you have to be open always to change. So all of that.
And isn't it part of that you're bringing in you're bringing in spirits from millennial, right? I mean, that's why you can never stop, you never stop learning.
Exactly. And you have to learn how to work with energies. You have to learn how to, importantly, you have to learn how to take care of yourself. Because you've got, in one dem, let's just say you do 4 connections, you've got 4 different vibrations and energies coming to communicate with you, 4 different minds and 4 different experiences, and you have to learn to be able to manage the energies. And so the next from that year, 1993 to now, that's what's been happening, except rather than being a student at the college now, I'm a tutor. And I travelled abroad, working in Europe quite a lot. Never been one to do the long haul work. I'm quite happy working at home and going to Europe.
Have you been to the United States, and have you done it in the United States?
The only time, no, I haven't. Well, I did actually, but it didn't go to the United States to work. I went to take the children to Disneyland.
Oh, neat.
and met a couple of people like you do sometimes, where you get talking and then things happen, and
Mhm.
you end up sort of having a little communication. I'm not in the habit of doing that because I don't agree with it. Because I think unless somebody's asked, it's unethical
Yeah,
to
and
tell.
usually that's spirit putting people together. Generally, if that
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely. I've had
like
some
that experience
amazing.
you had, the turning point, you who knew where that person was and literally changed your life. And what I found fascinating
Exactly.
when you said that was that you just knew. It's like, okay, game on.
Yeah, exactly. I remember changing once. He must have been 6'4", biker, full biker gear, beard, a real kind of what do you call it? It's a Hell's Angel look.
Yeah, yeah, Hell's
And
Angels, right?
sitting at a bench in a Burger King garden, and poof, it happened. Amazing. And when there's no way I'd approach somebody like that, but we just got talking, and I do
Yeah, I
believe
know
that
it's
then, yeah, then it's right. It's right to do it. But
spirits.
yeah, so I've kept busy, and I'm keeping busy. But like most people over the last year or 15 months, been very different. And at first, I really disliked working on Zoom.
Mm,
Um, However, having said that, I had already do because I do one-to-one teaching on Zoom and I do readings on Zoom. So I'd already been doing that, but it was the changing the whole working life to Zoom. Having said that, I'm getting far more used to it, and there is a bonus to not having to keep packing a suitcase. In England, fine, but I'm talking about the flight trips.
sure.
There's been a lovely bonus not having to keep packing, making sure you've got this and this and this, and sitting around airports, long drives to airports.
I think
Um,
there's going to be I think there'll be a balance going forward because there still is nothing like, those experiences that we discussed, but at the same time, you can pick and choose, or you can, instead of going to,
Absolutely.
you can do, well, we only have
Um,
a couple minutes left and I want to kind of wrap this all up.
okay.
Um, so can you just tell me generally, looking back, what this whole journey has meant to you, what the major lessons you've learned along the way and what you want to pass on to the viewers?
Um, I'm not sure if I call them lessons as realizations. Um, I think the biggest realization is um, learning that this coming into this world, coming into this field, if you like, teachers taught me that I wasn't who I thought I was. I was, but there was a lot that I thought I was that I wasn't. So what I mean by that is, it might sound a bit strange. The first lesson I had, if you like, was that what we experience in this life, if it's tough, if it's traumatic, if it's bad, um, is not punishment.
Mm,
And that and that seems a strange thing to say, but I always thought through some of the things I'd experienced that I had to have been a bad person to attract that, even as a child, and and that, that there is a God. Now, I'd always believed in God and I'd always believed in the spirit world, but when I knew it was real, that what I believed was true, and then I then came to realize and that it wasn't punishment, but not only that. I think what most people want in life is to feel loved and not to feel rejection. And I realized that it was there, that it was there. Um, and so that gave kind of the ability to move through future experiences in a very, very different way, in a positive way. Um, yes, we've got to experience things in life, and yes, we will still know pain, we will still know grief, because this understanding doesn't relieve you from that. You've still got to live the human part, the human experience, but it brings you strength.
yeah, and I think that's a beautiful way to conclude. It does that you do bring strength through this, through knowledge, and that was really
Mm.
beautifully said. Sally, I really want to thank you for spending this hour. I know it's getting to be Friday evening your time. It was wonderful to
Yes,
see you again, and I'll look forward to
likewise.
hopefully seeing you in person in
That would be
September.
lovely. Yeah, and we can have a big hug then when we do.
Well, thanks again, and God bless.
God bless you too. Thanks,
All right,
Craig.
thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Mind to Heart with me, Craig Richardson. My path has led me from the Protestant and Catholic churches as well as studies in alchemy, mediumship, Eastern philosophy, and most recently, Edgar Cayce and transpersonal psychology. As an intuitive life coach, I am ready to guide you to an amazing life. For more information about me, visit craigericardson.com.